Live on Facebook. Here we go. Pull that up. See if we can get it. Here we go. So close. Wow. Great, here we go. I think we're coming up. Okay. Awesome. I think we are on. And we are live. Are we live? Here we go. All right, we are there. Well, welcome back, everybody. I am your host, Dr. Greg Eckel of What the Health, and we have a very timely discussion today with my guest, Niki Gratix, and she is an award-winning functional health practitioner and transformation coach, helping people to optimize energy. In 2005, she co-founded one of the largest mind-body clinics in integrative medicine in the UK. The results with patients at the clinic were published as a preliminary study in 2012 in the prestigious British medical journal, Open. In 2015, she hosted the largest ever free online health summit on overcoming fatigue, interviewing 29 world-leading experts on optimizing energy with over 30,000 attendees. Since 2015, she's spoken on over 40 large online health summits, reaching over 1 million people worldwide. Welcome aboard, Niki.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Greg. It's great to be here.
Yes, and I love our conversations. You know, this is such an integral piece to healing trauma and mind-body health, which is a huge topic. I love what you bring to the table, and we are so in alignment with our understanding here. You know, I think what you've put together, you know, you're doing a ton of, well, one, the brick and mortar aspect in the UK, and then taking your message online, which is such a fun way to meet people where they're at. On What the Health, we have basically a really engaged listener and viewership, and you know, I encourage folks to share our message out with their friends and family members so we can create the more beautiful world our hearts know and desire. Today, I want to, you know, you've really interchanged or interlocked this component around the prevalence of trauma and the impact of emotions on physical health. So I think I want to start there. I know that's a very you know, very broad component, but I want to just kind of lob that over to you and open up our discussion.
Well, yes. So the impact of emotions, emotional health, trauma on the biology, probably the most underexposed risk factor for all chronic complex illness, but especially neurological disorders and mental health disorders, dementia, Parkinson's, that whole sort of group. And, you know, well, first of all, the prevalence of emotional stress and trauma, it's much bigger than we all think, because there's the word stress, and I think everybody knows that stress is bad for you and that stress kills. But it really, what we want to address is and look at is trauma. And especially early life stress and trauma, because that's the silent hidden epidemic, and it's where most stress comes from. So most people think of trauma, they think of PTSD, they think of discrete events like perhaps being in a war zone, a car accident, an assault. So those are discrete events. Most trauma and stress is actually from early life stress, and it's ambient, it's ongoing, it's to do with your attachment relationships. It's trauma arising, stress arising from your ongoing relationships with your key caregivers. And the bonding we have with our parents, usually it's parents are the main caregivers, but not always. But when there is a lack of bonding, that creates stress. And because it's happening at a young age, it gets inbuilt into our bodies. It becomes our identity. What should be a state of stress becomes a trait. So we're already wired for stress from a very early age, and it changes everything. It changes the energy field, it changes the epigenetic expression, it has an impact on the nervous system. So it's like a multi-layered impact, which then leads on to these changes in biology. So that's how, just overview of the mechanism of how sort of early life stress, childhood biography becomes adult biology. And just very briefly, we've talked before about the adverse childhood event study. That just was the study that really put this issue on the map. A massive study by the CDC, Kaiser Permanente, 17,500 adults, showed that early life stress and trauma causes a dramatic increase of 7 out of the top 10 causes of death, a 20-year reduction in lifespan. If you have a moderate exposure, you have a 400% increased risk of depression, Alzheimer's, would be Parkinson's, at those range of sort of neurological issues, twice as likely to get autoimmune, 6-fold increase in chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. So it really is across the board. And that's why we're trying to get the issue out there that, hey, it's not sort of stress of tearing around, having too much to do, too many emails, driving the kids to, it's that stress, but it's actually most of our stress is already in the system from attachment trauma. And 67% of all adults say they've had early life stress, and that was an underestimate. Only 45% of adults have had secure attachment with their key caregivers. So that was kind of conservative. It's probably going down.
So what is that for our viewers, listeners on? So you're saying 45% report adequate attachment. So how is that defined? What is that?
Yeah, attachment. So this is to do with secure attachment between child and mother, child and the main caregiver, between child and father. It's when the child has secure attachment, he feels safe, not overimposed on, not rejected. And there's different attachment styles when it goes wrong. So there's a style called a disorganized style. And this is where a parent's behavior is so unpredictable, it becomes frightening to the child. So you're talking about where there might be substance abuse in the family. Maybe a parent's depressed, maybe they've got bipolar, maybe they've got issues themselves. So the child isn't getting this emotional expression of love. So love is medicine. Love is as important in childhood as the nutrients that you get, the water that you drink, the diet, the exercise that you get. And the way it's expressed, this emotional expression, it's through eye contact, it's tone of voice, it's sort of these subconscious sort of neurological sort of subconscious communication that's happening. And children are sort of emotional sponges, but below a certain age, they're absorbing the emotions from the parent. And if a parent is a little bit narcissistic on the sociopathic side, where they might even be rejecting of the child, could be overly verbally abusive. And things in the ACEs study were things like physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, that kind of thing as well. So there's the more severe forms, but also just this lack of connection and bonding. The child then either has disorganized, or they can have what's called the avoidant type of attachment, where they just shut down emotions and underplay emotions in themselves and others because they didn't get any emotional response from the parents. Or the other type though is anxiety type as well. So it's a kind of an anxious ambivalent, where the child gets very anxious when parents leave, and it's a fear of abandonment. So all of that is sort of not good, secure attachment. It leads to autonomic nervous system changes. It leads to a lowered threshold response to stress. So we become basically, unfortunately, we become wired for stress. It also causes a freeze response in some people. So we can have a chronic stress, or we freeze and we shut down. And that's kind of, all of that impacts the vagus nerve and has neurological impacts, which it affects the biochemistry, epigenetics, and the field, actually the field, because that's a lot of where trauma actually gets stored ultimately, is in the field around the body. So we can talk more about that too. But I hope that explains a bit more about the bonding, social relations, social relations.
Is there a specific time frame or like a more impactful age range? I'm guessing early life, but I'm wondering if they put in the research, like, is it 0 to 7 years old, or it doesn't matter when this trauma is occurring, or the non-attachment component? Have you seen that?
So developmental applies to, in the study anyway, they were looking at everything that happened up to age 18, because at least, and beyond that, the brain is still developing. And you'll see sort of issues going all the way up to sort of sexual development and puberty, and issues that can arise if you have a lot of sexual rejection from the opposite sex as you're growing into that age, in the adolescent age. But a very key time is definitely very, very early. So sort of first 6 months of life is critical, precognitive, this is why you can't talk yourself out of this kind of trauma. It's kind of subconscious. But if there's a failure to bond at those very early stages, and it's a bad failure, that's very disruptive for the child. They won't only have psychological issues, it is absolutely physiological. It absolutely manifests as physiological. That person throughout their lifetime will have great difficulty. Nervous system regulation will be very difficult. You often see in a lot of chronic fatigue spectrum, severe spectrum chronic fatigue syndrome. You'll see there's a strong correlation between that. So first 6 months is very critical. It becomes even more obvious physiologically. Having said that, that's the psychologist speaking, and actually the ACEs study shows that, well, it all impacts the biology at a later age as well. But before age 4 is also, before age 4, before the brain comes online, that's a critical time as well. But it all counts, up to age 7, up to age 13, 14, these times when things get imprinted on the brain, because the brain's still growing, right?
Yeah, and so you also correlated that to the ACE scores, the adverse childhood events, which is both on the attachment component, but then also the other kind of novel or acute traumatic events that you were talking about. How do those two correlate, just for clarity?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So with what they were looking at in the ACEs study, it was mostly not the discrete type. So you have PTSD, which is relatively rare, and it's pretty curable. In fact, conventional approach is pretty good at that. If you have PTSD, which means you have symptoms that arise in response to that event, so you get triggered in response to thinking about or anything which brings you back to the event that traumatized you. And EMDR, eye movement desensitization in the program, is a great tool, and it's a top line I recommend people go and use, because it's high quality and it's conventionally sort of confirmed, and the training is high quality. So that's PTSD. Now, attachment trauma, which I mentioned, is more ambient, it's more ongoing. You can have verbal abuse for 10 to 20 years, all while you grew up at home, right? So it doesn't go away, and it becomes internalized, and you internalize that and turn it against yourself quite often as well. The interesting thing is the PTSD, attachment trauma trumps PTSD, meaning when they looked at soldiers who got PTSD in war zone environments, there were some that got it and some that didn't. And those that did get it had attachment trauma. So the ones that didn't get it didn't have attachment trauma. So this level of this bonding that we have with our social environment and our key caregivers, it gives us the ability to self-soothe or not. It gives us the resilience to deal with traumas, discrete traumas that happen in adulthood and in childhood as well. So the less secure we feel in ourselves, the more likely we'll develop PTSD in regards to discrete events. So it sets up our perception and how we handle stress in adulthood. It's also the #1 cause of all addiction, by the way, as well. It's all attachment trauma. So this is what I mean. It's really big. So
huge.
our abilities to deal with stress, how likely we are to get to PTSD, how stressed we feel in adulthood, and whether we become addicts, get mental health conditions, just about every complex illness that exists will often be defined by this sense of internal safety. And attachment, when we absorb a safe environment, we feel safe in ourselves. We have a sense of safety. We feel connected to ourselves. We feel calm. We can have a rational conversation with ourselves and stay self-loving when bad stuff happens, right? If we don't have good bonding, things go wrong. But when we don't feel good about ourselves, it all turns inwards, and there's all kinds of ways we'll become ultra achievers, perfectionists. People might be saying, oh, that now I'm starting to relate, overgivers. Tons of therapists, so the overgiver types, they didn't get enough love, so they have never-ending giving to others, and then they've downplayed their own needs. So yeah, there's givers, anxiety types, achiever types, and the giver types. So these are all sort of personality drives that are identity level, created because a state became a trait in childhood due to the developmental trauma. So if that makes sense, it's quite deep work.
Yes. Yeah, and very far reaching on that as well. So on that, so the telltale signs, you said there are a couple kind of archetypes of personalities that folks are found a way to make it through without, with having that deficit early on in life. So it's, folks are functional, but it may be in a subconscious reactive variety for the way that they're behaving in the world now. So I'm curious on the changes in the brain early on from the basically attachment deficit. What are we seeing with changes in the brain that happen or occur that way? Like how does our physiology rewire in response to kind of lack of that feedback coming in?
Yeah, so the researchers would actually say that this early life stress causes the glial cells, for example, in the brain to go berserk, and we have this chronic inflammation. I've talked about it in the context of limbic kindling. So the limbic system is kindled and on hyper stress state all the time. And then we've got this lowered threshold response to stresses. So the neurons are triggering and throwing out cortisol at the slightest thing. So we become hypersensitive, we become easily reactive to things, overreactive to things, and we don't seem to be able to self-regulate. And that causes a whole cascade of changes, obviously. You actually build neural pathways of staying in the fight-flight response, or we might be in that freeze response as well. But then it's also a direct impact on the gut. So early life stress, they show the studies, they've replicated studies showing that dysbiosis in the gut, you actually have a change in the microbiota, you've got more intestinal permeability because the vagal tone has gone down. You have low vagal tone, you've got lowered stomach acid, lowered energy going to the whole gut region, lowered enzymes, less movement through the gut, increased intestinal permeability. So, and all the reproductive organs, the vagus nerve is the rest, digest, detoxify, feed, breathe side. That's the calm side. That's the secure attachment side. They call it the nerve of compassion, the vagus nerve. Very important, tied up with this whole attachment thing. So, so that's past the biochemistry. I wanted to flag something else. It's a big area of research I'm trying to get out about this as well. I'm training at the NAMP to train the practitioners there. I also think that early life stress is the #1 cause of a condition called pyroluria. And pyroluria is a heme synthesis. It's dysfunction in the production of heme, which is the iron-containing part of red blood cells. But if you have pyroluria through stress, the epigenetic shift changes, so we don't produce heme properly, we will urinate out all our B6, manganese and zinc, and also biotin, and we'll also get iron deficient as well. So we get these chronic nutrition deficiencies because of the pyroluria, stress induced. That leads to the plethora. We've got think about B6, just B6, everything it does in the body, neurotransmitter production like dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, GABA are all impacted. So now we're all over the place.
Wow.
We're kind of feeling out of whack, right? Methylation, think about the impact on methylation and then what the methylation cycle does without getting too technical, but the ability to detoxify, again, a double whammy impact on neurotransmitters, cell repair, DNA expression. So you've pyroluria, and then zinc, disarm the immune system if you have no zinc. So what we're seeing is, and actually is correlation between pyroluria and Parkinson's, ADHD, learning difficulties, autism, chronic fatigue, Lyme disease. So this is one of the main mechanisms of how early life stress is translating into the biology. And what we see with chronic stress is, in the early life stress, is this build-up of, we're exposed to heavy metal toxicity, but we've lost our capacity to detox it because there's no zinc, no B6, so we haven't got the methylation and phase 2 liver detox happening to clean out the toxins. So we're priming the body to get Lyme, to get opportunistic infections, to get heavy metal toxicity. We're not clearing them out. So I'm just, that's one huge mechanism that I want to flag. I think it's a key component. We know it changes early life stress, absolutely shown in the data to change the epigenetic expression across the entire genome, making it more likely to have psychiatric imbalances, health conditions, cancer, the whole piece. So that's why it's affecting all chronic complex illness. But pyroluria, I want to flag that. So people should be regularly, routinely checked for it. And it's quite easy to reverse. You start building up, taking the nutrients to build
Do you
back
have
up. So,
some symptoms that you want to highlight around pyroluria?
Pyroluria, yeah. So it's actually can be genetic, can run. There's a subgroup where it is genetic and it's run in families. So you've got things like, his anxiety, depression. Think of all the things linked with zinc deficiency, stretch marks, sort of poor and brittle nails, anxiety, especially social anxiety. That, because if it's genetic, starting in childhood as well, or it doesn't have to be genetic, as it's epigenetic as also. So all the symptoms related to B6 deficiency, zinc deficiency, and then every condition that's linked with methylation issues. So all the neurological disorders, Parkinson's is being connected to it as well. So it's actually skeptics online that talk about this. So many symptoms, the list is massive, and it seems to be correlated with like all these chronic illnesses. That means 99% of the population probably have it. And I'm like, yeah, because 99% of people have had early life stress. It's the number one cause in my view. And we've got Dietrich Klinkart, who's written the Townsend letter about that, and a great book is Trudy Scott's book, The Nutrition Solution for Anxiety. Yeah, she covers pyroluria in there. So there's tons of list of symptoms. You go to her website as well, you see a list of symptoms. So yeah, but a lot of depression, anxiety is the big one, and autism, ADHD, learning difficulties, that spectrum.
And that is a great trace back to, so we've got the trauma leads to gut dysbiosis, leads to nutrient deficiencies, that then spreads across the board of the expression of all of these chronic illnesses that we're seeing today, really coming down from, that attachment on early life of feeling safe, of feeling of integrity, of having your biofield nourished rather than a depleted sense of fight, flight, or freeze, right? Am I synapsing that into kind of that component?
It's exactly that. We've got this limited view of stress where we just sort of thought about it in the, like, as a cortisol response, and just we've been focused on just like the adrenals and so on. In truth, this early life stress, it's a full body response. We could talk about the cell danger response, how early life stress has been triggers the mitochondria in the cell to shut into defense mode. We've got Dr. Robert Navio talking about that, and he's talking about early life stress as a major factor of it, and that we need to stimulate the vagus nerve to reverse the cell danger response. So it's really, this stress response is imprinted on the biochemistry, imprinted on the neurology, and it's very interesting. We talk about the biofield. If you think about life force energy, the drive of life force energy in us that enlivens us, that flows through us, the trauma will cause blockages, tears, holes, lack of coherence in the energy field around the body. And it's very important because having the coherent energy field, this is, look into the work of heart math, for example, where they show that you have a bigger field that's sort of emanating out of the heart. It's, I think, 100 times stronger than the one emanating out of the brain. So, they've got a 75% correlation with emotions. So a lot of people are carrying around unresolved emotions. They're getting stored in the biofield. It's also in the waters of the body, but they're causing dissonance, lack of coherence, information distortion in the energy flow as well. So that's actually the true root cause. If you don't clear the trauma, which is actually being stored, I mean, where a memory is stored, if you try and cut up the neurons to find a memory, they've never found it. They've
Right.
never found memories in the neurons or in the synapses between neurons. No memories, never found. So we have Carl Pribram, the German neuroscientist, who said he thinks the memories are stored in the fields created around the brain by all the neurons firing together. So he's just onto the right tracks. It's in the fields. So we actually want to address the biochemistry, replete the nutrients, heal the gut, balance the hormones. We want people to be stimulating their vagus nerve every day, make it a lifestyle thing, get a vagus nerve stimulator. I can tell you a good one, no financial correlation with them. I've been looking, no financial connections. It's called Modius Health, actually, MODIUS health.com. It's about $500. They're marketing it as a weight loss device. They could have done it for sleep because the vagus nerve has so many things. It stimulates the vestibular nerve and then that stimulates the vagus nerve. Really well researched, it's well made, works with an iPhone. People asking me all the time, because I talk about the vagus nerve all the time, and they say, well, what is their electrical devices? It's like, yes, this is the only one that I found that I will recommend. So there's that, and then we want to do energy work to clean out the field of the low frequency distorted resonance in the field. That's the multi-layered approach I would take to any chronic complex illness. But if you want to deal with trauma as well, we want the bottom-up approaches. We need the neurological level, and we need the top-down, which is, I'm sort of talking top-down more as like energetic approaches. And by the way, EMDR is actually an energy psychology. It's based on the energy field. It's based on Chinese meridians and the meridian system. So, and that's a conventionally validated therapeutic intervention. Emotional freedom technique, both for PTSD, but they're energetic. Again, they're energy psychology. So energy medicine, energy psychology is definitely a big part of the future of where we're going as we understand the mind and the body are one thing. And what goes on in the psyche is reflected in the biology.
I'm curious, do you have, how do we measure that component in the field? Those researchers that are looking, just listening to Bruce Lipton as well, talking about measurement of the biofield around, have you come across some devices that help with that, or how about that front?
Yeah, I mean, you could do it quite simply by keeping an eye on your heart rate variability,
Yeah.
That's the best measure of stress, scientifically validated. I know that there's the Aura rings. I don't have any affiliation with those either, but that you can get the Aura rings, and they definitely, there we go.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on your heart rate variability. The lower the emotional state, the more depression, anxiety, powerlessness, fear, rage, anger, and all that stuff that is basically being is actually held often sometimes subconsciously in the field. It will lower the frequency of the field. It will lower heart rate variability. So if you've got a chronically low, obviously other things can cause that too. It could be toxins, could be mold, could be bacterial infections, that all counts too. But definitely your emotional state, your set point. Where's your emotional set point? So we all have a sort of center of gravity that we center towards, we come back to all the time. And a lot of people that love stress, it's not that happy a state most of the time. A lot of it kind of in chronic stress quite a lot. So one way to measure that, if you want it a more conventional approach, would be heart rate variability, and that's widely available. And then the other sort of ways are emotional intuition, knowing how you feel. Like sometimes you don't always need to have external validation of something you can sense and feel in yourself. And you can also work with practitioners, energy healing practitioners. There are some energy scanning systems as well. so there's a range of different ways of getting help to figure out, even just talking to psychotherapists as well, that would help too, although not a huge fan on talk therapy for healing developmental trauma. It has its place, but it's overestimated, over pushed in the conventional side. It's just
Yeah, for sure. I think having the EMDR, you know, like the body keeps the score, is a great read on that front. And really the research on folks coming out of like war and significant trauma, not to gauge or judge like, oh, they had worse trauma than here, but like coming out of as refugees and war-torn countries is pretty extreme trauma and stress. And they're really showing the EMDR as a way to really help get people to clear that from the body in a relatively quick way as well, right? I'm curious on the heart rate variability. Everybody has their own set point on that, right? So you're comparing yours to yourself. There's not an agreed upon like, oh, everybody needs to be, you know, up here on this high level of heart rate variability. And for folks that don't know what heart rate variability is, there's a couple terms that I want to unpack here on the show. Is really it's the difference of the beat of your heart rate. Beating is a pretty consistent rate, but the variability of the impulse beat to beat is what heart rate variability is. And so you want a higher heart rate variability, which shows that your body is more at rest. So please, Niki, add in there whatever you need on that for clarification. Does that hit it there?
Yeah. Yeah, the way I think about it is we want this greater variability, even though that seems more chaotic. It is chaotic, but that's resilience. So the way it's adaptive capacity. That's the way I see it. Like if it's too fixed and linear, it's brittle and it can be broken, sort of thing. So if you see what I mean? So if you've got variability, it means adaptability, that means resilience, and the chaos actually allows for the flexibility and to cope with things. That's the way I've thought about it, because it is sort of what you're asking for, a greater chaos level. So systems, it's a system, complex adaptive systems, I guess, some of the basis of that.
Do you have some ideal numbers that you have people try to shoot for in the heart rate variability realm?
I personally don't, because I don't directly work with, I don't necessarily use that. It's a great tool, so I'm not saying to people not to use it, and they should, they can. I just tend to use a little bit more emotional intuition with people, and I work actually, in my industry, I work a lot with biofield tuning therapy. So one of the things, how do you oscillate out these heavy frequencies, if you like, these heavier emotions with the sort of dissonant frequencies and incoherent frequencies? You can use, this is, by the way, pulsed electromagnetic frequency therapy. Thousands of mainstream papers about that. It's partly brain entrainment, and what it does is it gets the brain back into alpha waves, gets them out of being stuck in, say, beta. So through resonance, pulsed electromagnetic frequency, field therapy is great, and it works on the same principles as sound therapy and biofield tuning. We're talking about sort of resonating out through resonance, through, if you think about an opera singer, when she sings, she can break a glass. How is she doing that? That was sound shattering matter, right? So sound changing matter. So that's what we're doing when we're doing biofield tuning in the field, where we'll find stuck energy, we'll find heavier energy, and the tuning forks will change sounds where we're hitting the heavier stuff. So I tend to work more intuitively with sound, with feelings, and intuiting how people, what they're carrying in their field. That's just because that's my energy practitioner side of me. And then it's also, it's asking it's the patient and the client themselves as well. Like they know, you know, they know if they're feeling pretty crap all the time. So
yeah, they know it.
Yeah.
So how do you, if some folks are just getting into discussion around field, right? So we're moving more into a quantum understanding of the universe. That's the quantum physics is basically the best math there is out there. So showing what reality is. So when you're referencing the field, you know, you keep doing these hand gestures of this space surrounding us. So how do you talk about the field, or what is that?
Good question. So I've been describing it as that picture that you can imagine of the toroidal sort of energy flow coming out of the heart and sort of coming up through the spine, up through, out of the head and coming out, and sort of emanating out through the central, through the heart. And it's, if you look at HeartMath and look at their pictures of the field, it's like a toroidal field. But obviously at some level it's infinity as well. At some level that is going out to infinity. But we sort of do have a sort of stronger plasma field, a thicker plasma field or etheric field around us. And then it's also got electromagnetic components, and that's interacting with the fascia, the whole body, the water in our body is also tied into that too. Our emotions also get stuck in water. They get imprinted into the waters of our bodies, which is very, very interesting thing I discovered when I'm emotionally detoxing and getting people to do emotional detoxing. Tons of water therapy, sauna work to get the emotional stuff out. If we've shaken up a lot of emotions, I want them to be doing sauna therapy, drinking lots of hydrating water, the good types of water that help with that. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so the field, we definitely have a kind of a plasma-based field around us, and I think there's tons of evidence there. But at this stage, we, you know, apart from just Chinese medicine that's been around for thousands of years, it's interesting when you look at all the leading psychotherapies are like going into the energy psychology realm, which is based on the Chinese meridian system, and the idea EFTs tapping on the endpoints of meridians that are sort of moving through the body. So yeah, and it's the biofield tuning. The work of Eileen McCusick is very interesting. She's the world expert on biofield tuning, and she's sort of done the anatomy of the field and the certain areas of the body where we tend to store certain types of emotions as well. Same with in Chinese medicine, like, you know, the lungs is linked with grief, you know, anger in the liver. So what we're seeing is, I think we'll see more and more of that, and I'm trying to sort of raise awareness that we really do want to address things in the field. But there's tons of great neurological work that needs to be done. I wanted to mention NAM therapy actually for people. If people want to know what's a really good therapy for developmental trauma that's more at the neurological level, NAM is by Dr. Lawrence Heller, the neuroaffective relational model. I think that's what that stands for. And it's using somatic experiencing but applied into a developmental sort of approach. So he helps, his book, Healing Developmental Trauma, it's called Developmental Trauma, Dr. Lawrence Heller. It's a great book. His therapy, NAM therapy. If somebody actually wants to get one-on-one therapy, I would check into that, because it's based on somatic experiences, and that's the work of Dr. Peter Levine, but it's applied to people with that more long-term type trauma, not the discrete type trauma. But NAM therapy, just in case people are like, okay, but what actual professional therapy is there for developmental, aside from, I've talked about the energy approaches. So we just make sure we get that one in there as well, because I think it's one of my top ones that I'd recommend.
Love it. Thank you for that tip. So everybody listening, this is What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel. My guest today is Niki Gratix. We are talking about healing of trauma and healing mind-body component to help bring more resonance into the world, I believe, and having folks work more from their hearts and accessing their creative geniuses out there. So, you know, I think that's a good transition into talking about, you know, okay, so really, I mean, when you look at ACE scores just by themselves, not even bringing in the developmental attachment deficits, you know, really everybody, when you look in, at least in North America, it's like, wow, nobody gets through this thing without the trauma, right? The ACE scores are huge. So looking at it like, well, what are we to do? Like, what are the therapies like to bring back the vagus nerve? You mentioned that multiple times. We talked about heart rate variability as a way to measure, but also to train. And then you've mentioned therapies as we've gone through here, but looking at it on a, just maybe at a starting spot then of like, okay, well, what do we do? You know, on a day-to-day basis, you were mentioning like we need to be putting some vagal tone in on the day-to-day, because we keep layering on top of our nervous system that got imprinted at such a young age of, you know, into a kind of, it did the best it could, but it really is allowing or setting the stage for this whole plethora of other disease processes to express. So how do we reverse that, Niki?
Yeah, and the good news is we can.
Yes.
That's the great news. We can
Yes.
change the epigenetic expression. We can reverse the impacts or the neurology, but we need this multifactorial approach. We need what we call the bottom-up approaches, and we need the kind of midway, the neurological brain, and we need the top-down, which is the energy and some of the psych work, so mindset work. And and it's going to be different for everybody. It's personalized medicine, you know, it's functional medicine. The principles of personalization apply absolutely here. So how much someone does of, you know, in each of those areas is going to be different for each person. Yeah. So some of the main things, it's really important to address the biochemistry. If you had emotional trauma and you know, and let's say you go and you tot up your score and go, oh, I've got 8 ACEs and I've got these health conditions, and okay, now I realize that's been a factor. You definitely want to consider what you're doing on the biochemistry and the functional medicine. You don't want to throw that stuff out. It's really important. So some of the highlights of there's so much that functional medicine, naturopathic medicine has to offer, nutrition, there's so much, it's a really important part. So usually with people with emotional trauma, they have their neurotransmitters are usually all out of whack, they're all over the place for some of the reasons we talked about. So one of the first things I do that can help people is actually give people high dosing of some of the neurotransmitter support. So as long as there's no conflict with medications they're on, if they're on psych meds, then they need to work with their practitioner and obviously not take anything without, you know, checking with their medical professional, you know. But things like, you know, GABA, tryptophan, 5-HTB, choline, and things that help acetylcholine, the memory neurotransmitters and so on. There's also, I mentioned 5-HTB, GABA, theanine for people who can't get hold of GABA, serotonin, you know, all serotonin boosters. So they often, the neurotransmitter support, it just helps people be able to make the lifestyle changes, because it's difficult, right? It's work having to do the lifestyle changes, and we want compliant clients, but they're coming to us. You know, I wouldn't be coming to you if I could just do everything. I already know what to do. I'm not doing it. You know, right. Some of it is knowing what to do. Some of it is that, but some of it is like they already know and like aren't compliant. So it's really important to help them, like give them the neurotransmitter so they can get out of bed in the morning, but then deal with the root cause of, like, it's probably B6, zinc, manganese, these deficiencies. Address pyroluria so that your body can start producing its own neurotransmitters and you're not relying on supplementation. So deal with the pyroluria. Actually see functional medicine specialists if you need to help with gut issues and things like this. Some of the things, the practical things that are it's not Eileen Kuzik, Andrea Nakayama, she's got her non-negotiables she talks about. The non-negotiables are certain lifestyle things, like a diet that manages blood sugar. Blood sugar is so important, controlling blood sugar. People are probably being diagnosed with bipolar and it's just a blood sugar issue. And if they fix the blood sugar thing, their moods would go back to normal. It's just the roller coaster, because they're starving glucose on the brain and then suddenly getting an energy hit. So simple tools. I'm sure you must have covered this on your podcast. How do you eat a diet to manage blood sugar control? You know, don't miss out breakfast. Have protein. Have good fats at breakfast. Have that at lunch and dinner as well. Eat regularly. You know, some of these basic things to get your blood sugar under control. Know what the symptoms of hypoglycemia and insulin resistance are. It's all over the internet. You know, this is quite so practical things people do and are important. Circadian rhythm management and sleep, massive. Life-changing things, and it's so easy to do. Actually, the simple things like going to bed earlier, go to campfire light in the evening. Don't do what I'm doing, it's huge light at the moment. But campfire light, and get the blue blocking light on, get complete darkness at night, bring in a little bit of intermittent fasting, so maybe don't eat 3 hours before bed so you get deeper sleep. First thing in the morning, get bright sunshine first 30 minutes on waking. If you don't have sunshine outside, get one of these SAD lamps that you can buy on Amazon, $40, something like that. So these are simple things. And when you start building in the blood sugar control, then you've got the lifestyle. Vagus nerve stimulation, loads of different ways to stimulate the vagus nerve that you don't have to buy anything. Meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, singing, essential oils. Most psychotherapies and all the therapists tend to do it. Exercise. Just about everything that we've all known about that is mind-body medicine works by stimulating the vagus nerve. So have people do a miracle morning, pick 3 things that will stimulate the vagus nerve after you've had your protein breakfast and you've got your bright sunshine. Maybe do some gratitude journaling, 5 minutes of breathing, 5 minutes of meditation, or yoga if you don't get on with meditation. So you're setting up the nervous system to be in good vagal tone. So here, that's some practical things that people could do today that don't involve going to see a practitioner. But so that's at the biochemical level. We talked about the neurological, vagus nerve, and then there's sort of the energy side, that's the other side left to do. You could buy devices, like I mentioned, the Modius device, for further help with there's neurofeedback, there's NARM therapy to address the nervous system. Just think what else we do. Pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. Dr. Pawluk's site is, I actually recommend Dr. Pawluk, Pawluk, just because he's a physician and he's not linked to one product. You'd have to have a consult with him. It's a little bit buyer beware on the PEMF devices at the moment. So I'd consult an expert, and we consult him, because he'll want to know what your health issues are, and you need to pick the right machine if you want to go down that route. Red light therapy is fab. Thousands of papers, PubMed papers, on how that regenerates, stem cell regeneration. It rebuilds neurons in the brain. So does PEMF therapy as well, by the way. Both powerful stem cell stimulators. Very important, because a lot of people are talking about vagus nerve stimulation, but if you have brain degeneration, the brainstem won't be stimulating the vagus nerve, and then all the breathing, you can do all the breathing you like and it won't work. So I was talking to Dr. Datis Karazian about this. He's like, okay, talks about the vagus nerve a lot, but he's like, if you've got the brain degeneration to a certain degree, you might need to go a little bit further, do some stem cell stimulation work. There's nothing wrong with the vagus nerve, it's the brain that stimulates the vagus nerve, let's remember. So so you've got PEMF work and red light therapy, and then you want to think about all the good essential oils, and if you've got mold, toxins, you want to be cleansing all that stuff out so the brain's nice and healthy and you've got a healthy vagus nerve. Everything's connected to everything. So it's not really hard to talk about one thing, but I think we covered a lot there.
That was a huge list, huge list. And, and it really is indicative of that there is a lot to be done, right? So, my encouragement for folks listening is really tune in, listen to what your heart is saying and what resonates with you. It doesn't mean go and do all of that, because, I know you've got other things going on with your lives, but, pick 3 items of the list and what really lights you up. Like, follow your joy, listen to your heart, and act from there. And that will start to get some momentum for you. But, you got to just start. You got to commit into something. So just pick 3, and you listed, kind of the top 3 that came off of that list was like, okay, the gratitude journal sounded really great. Some meditation, maybe if I'm not feeling like I can sit, maybe it's yoga and stretching in a mindful state with breathing. The deep breathing. And I like to sing. So I like that aspect of it. And maybe sometimes occasionally finishing a hot shower with cold on the face, right? Those are vagus nerve stimulators. So I'm not sure for you personally, what are you doing? What resonates for you?
I do a lot of biofield tuning therapy. One of the things I'm starting to teach people to do is to use the tuning forks on themselves, because it's a lot of hours to clear developmental and attachment trauma. And if you were seeing a practitioner, a biofield tuning practitioner, that starts to get expensive. So I'm actually working on a program to teach people how to just buy a tuning fork. There's a certain crystal, an amplification crystal, that will make it more powerful. I've created guided musical meditations that also entrain the brain and imprint the biofields, and you do all of that at the same time. It's music therapy. I love the fact that I brought music therapy into it's not all just hardcore biochemistry anymore. So I've got music therapy.
Love it.
So I love music therapy. I've got a free meditation actually that people can download on my website if they sign up to my newsletter, just nikigratix.com. And so music therapy, sound therapy, tuning forks, I'm doing that a lot. I do the Modius device every day. I more or less stick to I'll tell you something interesting. When you really do clear your energy field finally, and you start to rebalance the vagus nerve, all the restrictions in the diet and even the circadian rhythm, dare I say it, I'm only saying this is advanced, right? But all the restrictions, and the things that most people stick to the circadian rhythm. Yes. There's some diets like the paleo diet, profoundly important often while we're healing things like leaky gut, and if we've got mold and heavy metal toxicity and things to clear out. but I don't think it's meant to be the long-term way we eat long-term. We are meant to have some, sugar handling. We are meant to have some carb, I
Yeah.
think if anything, we're probably meant to be a little bit more on the vegetarian side, even if you look at Dr. Walter Longo's work and the Human Longevity Project and Jason Paul's work. And I think most of them are kind of saying this heavy meat thing,
Yeah.
it's not, it's got its place. Like to begin with, it can actually reduce people's inflammation levels and they need to do it. But once you get the psychology sorted, the nervous system and the energy field, guess what? You're not as reactive to foods. Your food intolerances might go down. You can actually get up, feel great, and not be doing the exact circadian rhythm management stuff. But it takes time. It takes time.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah. So I was just saying, I don't stick to everything as much as I did, but only because I've done a lot of sort of the neurological work. And did a lot of addressing nutrient deficiencies and everything.
Now, Niki, I know you have a big summit coming up here, and I want to make sure that we talk about that. So you have, at the end of this month, you have the big summit coming. So please tell us about that.
Yeah, so we have the Trauma and Mind Body Super Conference coming up, and perhaps you might have a link below. You might have your link that you'd like to use below. And it is massive. We've got 90 plus speakers, and we literally have covered all the angles that we talked about. Like everything we talked about, we have a speaker just dedicated to that topic. So we're looking at the developmental trauma, the impact on health across a lifetime, all the things you'd want to work out on the energetic level, everything you'd want to do at the neurological level, and everything you need to do bottom up in the functional medicine level. And we have the top people, and we've got Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's the mind body, you are the placebo, how the mind affects the body. Dr. Lisa Rankin, some of these Hay House published authors. We've got Dr. Jeff Bland talking about and Dr. Kelly Brogan doing the functional medicine kind of side of it. We've got the world leading expert on trauma, Professor Bessel van der Kolk, who's the Body Keeps the Score author, talking about the difference between PTSD and developmental trauma. Dr. Peter Levine, Dr. Gabor Mate, we've got Dr. That was like amazing. We've just had David Perlmutter's just signed up, the neuroscientist. So it's a big deal. Dr. Tom O'Brien, Dr. Ben Lynch on the genetics, Donna Gates, Ari Whitten, Jason Paul. It's like just about everyone. I think, I'm just thinking who else. Dr. Pomper on heavy metal detox, inspired by an interview I heard you do with him, by the way, on Brain Degeneration Summit. Yes. I actually got his program, so I thought I need to implement that into mine. People like Dr. Neil Nathan, who's a real expert on things like mold toxicity. We've got people talking about CBD, EMDR. We have Dr. Lawrence Heller on his NARM therapy. We've got Dr. Dan Paul Heller on attachment style. She's the world leading expert on attachment trauma. So everything is on.
I can't wait. That sounds amazing. Yes, I will have the link in the show notes for sure. Any last parting words for the listeners of What the Health?
Have fun, trust, and know the body. The body knows how to heal itself. And love is the best medicine. And that's actually what we're talking about, because really what is attachment trauma? It's the expression of love. And if we don't get love as a child, it really screws you up. That's you could summarize this entire thing by, if you don't get love in childhood, it screws you up for life, mentally and emotionally. Love is all you need.
Yeah. Lovely.
There you go, John Lennon. Same with John Lennon.
Yes, we'll quote you on that. That is the message. And thank you so much. This is such important work. This underlies so much that we talk about on the show. Folks, seriously, if this one doesn't get you sharing the show, I don't know what will. This is how we heal. This is how we create heaven on earth, bring more love into this sphere. Is we've got to address these things. We all have them. It's the human experience. And we are just now getting to the point of realizing, like, oh, this stuff actually does matter, and it plays out generation after generation after generation. And so that's what we're looking to kind of put the kibosh on that and really get more love and affection out there. So Niki, thank you so much, and really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's always a pleasure. I always enjoy our interviews, and thank you for the work that you do as well. It's very important.
Thank you so much. Everyone, this is What the Health, and we air from 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Tune in next week. See you then. Whoop, whoop.